One of the hallmarks of authoritarian leaders is their megalomania, their desire to be admired, to have power, and to be able to stand on the world stage with a lot of prowess. Ambition is not generally a problem. It means the idea that you will strive for something greater and work to achieve something worthwhile. But when ambition turns to entitlement, this suggests a measure of megalomania. President Trump has been in the news lately where he received a peace award from FIFA. Now, this is their first peace award, and it seems to be on the back of the idea that Trump had failed to get a bid for the Nobel Peace Prize. It is clear from a number of his statements that he was disappointed that he did not win a Nobel Peace Prize. And FIFA, who are doing a World Cup in the Americas next year, picked up on this and utilized the opportunity to get in favor with the president by awarding him the first FIFA World Peace Award. This kind of recognition is really important to authoritarian leaders because it gives them vindication and validation that they are the people that they present to be. This also happened with Joseph Smith. When the Saints were driven out of Missouri as refugees and found refuge in Illinois, they commanded a bit of charity, and one of them was that they were given a space and a generous city charter in order to have some peace. Part of that peace was the understanding that they would be allowed to have a militia, which became known as the Nauvoo Legion. Governor Thomas Carlin, who recognized that the Mormons in Illinois represented a significant voting bloc, recognized Joseph as the leader of this Nauvoo Legion and gave him the title of Lieutenant General. Now, Joseph had not been a military leader, not at least officially, but some of the campaigns that he had done in Missouri suggested that he was really interested in the army and fighting and things like that. But Joseph had not been able to go into the army as a young man because of his leg surgery and his inability to walk. Governor Carlin's bestowal of the office of Lieutenant General on Joseph Smith made Joseph incredibly happy. It was the title that made him the most happy. He signed his letters General Joseph Smith. He had people call him General Smith, and he also wore his military uniform as his most special clothing. He loved being a general. He wanted to be a military leader. He wanted to be seen as a powerful military man, and he was incredibly attached to this image that Governor Carlin enabled him to have. Joseph was so enamored with his personal military that he got every citizen in Nauvoo, or the men, to join the Nauvoo Legion, and so it was one of the biggest military forces in the state. Thomas Carlin actually kind of created a monster because this military force became so big and so threatening to the outside area that it became its own problem. It's a cautionary tale that if you give megalomaniacs power that's undeserving them, they will use it in terrible ways, sometimes against you. So for the moment, FIFA has scored great points with the President of the United States, but these just yet to be a competition next year, and let's hope this doesn't backfire. One of the weirdest and most depressing comparisons between Trump and Joseph Smith is their misogyny. The way that Trump speaks to female reporters is just so disturbing. He often uses a barrage of terrible tropes, stupid, piggy, these kind of ways that women are demeaned in his presence, particularly if they try to assert some accountability to the president. It is incredibly disheartening to see anybody treat another human being like this, but to have a man who is in a political power office speak to women with such disregard and so demeaning is a real indictment on the President of the United States. and a culture of misogyny in the Americas. Joseph Smith did exactly the same kind of thing, particularly with rivals, women who were powerful, women who were seen as prophetesses, people who other people revered. Joseph spoke harshly against. He spoke against Anne Lee, who was head of the Shakers back in 1833. He spoke against Johanna Southcote, who professed to be a prophetess, in 1842. He said of Johanna, God would not suffer a woman to rule or to usurp authority in the church. But here we find a woman, the founder of a church, the revelator and guide, the Alpha and Omega, contrary to all acknowledged rule, principle, and order. Joseph was big on women supporting their husbands and men of the church. He exhorted the sisters in the Religious Society always to concentrate their faith and prayers for and place confidence in their husbands whom God has appointed for them to honor, and in those faithful men whom God has placed at the head of the church to lead his people, that they should arm and sustain them with their prayers. This was also the case with the scriptures and revelations that Joseph brought forward. The Book of Mormon particularly was very much anti-women. They're just not represented at all. And in some cases, those women who did get represented only did so in relation to the men that were around them. Even Sariah, who's this great woman, wife of a prophet, is held out to be a complainer who does not see the righteousness of her husband's visions. And this seems to mirror the kind of relationship Joseph saw between his own mother and his own father, particularly when his mother broke with his father's universalism to join the Presbyterian Church and take some of the siblings with her. This is also the case with revelations like Doctrine and Covenants 132, where women are deemed to be in subjection to men, and if they don't obey men, particularly with regard to polygamy, they will be destroyed. This deference to men and sanction against women who would object to the office or the authority of men is something that is really particular to Joseph and his leadership. And this is the same with Donald Trump, that women who seek to make him accountable or challenge him are deemed to be the most terrible of people. Misogyny is a huge part of authoritarian leadership, and it is exemplified in the lives of Donald J. Trump and Joseph Smith. One of the hallmarks of authoritarian leadership is blame. They galvanize their base with an understanding that some people are subverting their benefit and existence. That if these people were to be removed, that life would be wonderful, that there would be no problems, and that people would thrive. It sets up a huge us and them narrative with the idea that we are the chosen and righteous and they are the evil and needing to be destroyed. Trump has done a great job of galvanizing his base with these kinds of sentiments, particularly against immigrants, brown immigrants, and also those of his political opposition. That if you belong to either of those two groups, you are an enemy and worthy of being taken out. He uses demeaning words to describe them. He suggests that they are unpatriotic, and he seeks to have them removed in some way or another. This is the kind of thing that Joseph also did. He sent people to Missouri, suggesting that it was their inheritance. And when the local Missourians objected to this and kicked them out, this became the mechanism that he could describe these people as the evil other. This intensified in 1838 when Joseph and Sidney and the church had to move to Missouri to flee Ohio, and became a really big problem with the Mormon-Missouri War. Joseph was incarcerated and held for treason, but managed to escape and flee to Illinois. But when he found himself in a place of security, he started attacking Missouri, first verbally and then with incursions to the Missouri people. After the former Missourian governor, Lilburn Boggs, was shot in an attempted assassination, Joseph was sought for extradition to face charges. He managed to avoid extradition and fight against Missouri some more, which enraged them even more, which escalated the situation with other attempted abductions and extraditions back to Missouri. Joseph began preaching increasingly violent rhetoric against Missouri and the people there, that they were somehow terrible. Joseph preached sermons saying, "If Missouri will not stay a cruel hand in an unhallowed persecution against us, I restrain you no longer. I turn the key that opens the heavens, and I will lead you into battle. You can defend yourselves, and God will bear you off. And let them go to hell and be damned." He also appealed to the Green Mountain Boys, a militia from his native state, to rise up in the majesty of virtuous freemen and by all honorable means bring Missouri to the bar of justice. He goes on, "For the reputation of a disgraced country and for the glory of God, and may all earth bear me witness, if Missouri, bloodstained Missouri, escape the due demerit of her crimes, the vengeance she so justly deserves, that Vermont is a hypocrite, a coward, and this nation the hotbed of political demagogues." His violent war rhetoric against Missouri was one of the things that landed him in jail in Illinois. But it wasn't only Missourians who felt Joseph's wrath. Congress, who failed to provide redress for the Mormons in their expulsion from Missouri, also got the brunt of a lot of violent rhetoric. In 1843, Joseph prophesied, "By virtue of the holy priesthood vested in me, in the name of Jesus Christ, that if Congress will not hear our petition and grant us protection, they shall be broken up as a government, and God shall damn them, and there shall nothing be left of them, not even a grease spot." United Joseph's followers in Nauvoo to want to fight for him and to seek the downfall of Missouri. Many of the saints in Nauvoo crossed the border and made incursions into Missouri, feeling completely justified as they raided along the border towns. And the resulting us and them rhetoric just exacerbated the whole tension in the area, which actually ended up with Joseph's death. These kind of polarizing declarations against groups of people, particularly just normal everyday people, become a really big divisive plot that undermines freedom, political discourse, and the ability for a country and a people to exist in peace. Part of being an authoritarian leader is claiming authority from God. This comes with the idea that you can circumvent legal rules because there is a higher moral law that needs to prevail. And the idea that your leader is called of God and therefore might need to do some things which are a little bit tricky is also a great way to justify some bad behavior. And your leader might have some exclusive access to God, which may allow you to follow them, regardless of the fact that some of those things seem a bit worrying, because you believe that God is communicating directly with them. Here's a tweet from the president on Truth Social. "You know, I've known Jesus for a long time. He often says, 'Donald Trump, we are really close friends, and my father is happy that you're making America great again. It's my favorite country.' When he saved my ear from that bullet, he whispered in my ear, the one that was saved, and said, 'The whole world owes you a debt of gratitude for being so Christian and having perfect morals.'" There is a lot to unpack in that statement, but the idea that the president is getting approval from God, that he is acting in some higher morals, this enables the followers to be able to justify some of the things that they might otherwise be concerned about. Joseph Smith did exactly the same thing. He, as a prophet of God, talked to God and particularly Jesus in person. He got revelation from Jesus directly, which he then passed on to the members of the church, suggesting that they were favored and that what Joseph was doing was amazing. This is Doctrine and Covenants section 1, which was received in 1831, and it was the preface for the Book of Commandments. In it, Jesus speaks in the first person, suggesting that the rebellious shall be pierced with much sorrow, and the voice of warning shall be unto all people. That he called upon his servant Joseph Smith Jr. and spake unto him from heaven, and gave him commandments, and gave commandments to others. That Joseph Smith Jr. might have power, and that he might have power to lay the foundations of this church and to bring it forth out of obscurity and out of darkness, the only true and living church upon the face of the whole earth. Joseph's followers firmly believed that he was talking to God and that God was giving him direction about how things should change so that the country was more righteous. And this is how a lot of people feel about Donald Trump, that he is approved of by God and that Jesus is directing him to make America great again. And anybody who would argue against that is somehow connected to the opposition, to Satan, and so therefore not worthy of being heard and maybe even worthy of being taken out. In Joseph's time, Jesus assured the members that they were the righteous, that the wicked others would pay the price for their unrighteousness, and that the members would reign triumphant at the end. Trump's followers are also waging a holy war, trying to defeat the adversary by adhering to this great prophet, general, president of the United States, who is currently in office. When you're trying to explain why people might be disagreeing with you, you have to come up with some plausible ideas. One of the most innovative ways that the Trump administration has done this is to suggest the idea of a mental illness, Trump derangement syndrome, that people might have lost their rationality and their ability to have real concerns about things, particularly when it relates to President Trump, and that somehow they have been disturbed mentally or their physical faculties have been undermined. This is the idea that Trump can't be wrong and that so you are. It fits neatly into a narrative of persecution, that this is not justified, that it comes from somewhere else, and that it's targeted against somebody who is righteous and is doing a great job, but for some reason is being presented as somebody poor or terrible. It's a clever way to deflect from genuine concerns with the idea that the people who are making these assessments are somehow out of their minds. And in particularly a religious context, this is the idea that they've been taken over or supplanted by Satan. Joseph Smith claimed a lot of persecution, the idea that he was somehow so righteous that Satan was trying desperately to undermine him. And so the good that he was actually doing was being twisted into something bad. So clever is this strategy that it even becomes a mark of righteousness, the idea that you will be persecuted because you are doing the absolute best. That when you're acting for heaven, Satan will target you directly. Joseph Smith spoke to this idea many times, but one of my favorites is in 1844. He stated, "When a man begins to be an enemy to this work, he hunts me, he seeks to kill me, and never ceases to thirst for my blood." In this way, Joseph was able to frame those who disagreed with him as being under the influence of Satan, particularly if they had been supportive of him in the past. Reframing concerns as persecutions enabled Joseph to deflect allegations against him and convince his followers that he was more righteous than not. Joseph Smith was held in jail on charges of treason twice in 2 different states, and yet his followers believed that he was beyond reproach and was the most righteous of human individuals. President Trump is a convicted felon, and yet his followers believe that he is somehow incredibly righteous, and those were acts of persecution. And what's even crazier is that allows him to persecute others and to make that look like he is just righting the scales of some injustice. These labels enable him to deflect criticism and actually push back against it with the idea that he is acting in some kind of righteous way. Persecution, therefore, becomes power. One of the hallmarks of authoritarian leadership and why they galvanize such a base is usually because the leader suggests that people are being treated unfairly and that the leader can at some point right some wrongs so that the really righteous, the chosen, the people who are supposed to have the resources are going to actually get them. This appeal that the US was being treated unfairly and that the rules could be rewritten, particularly with tariffs, has been a really interesting experiment to watch unfold. The ways that different economies work together is something that evolves over time with a lot of negotiation and the idea that people have input into what things become fair over time because of various resources and swapping of goods and services. There are certainly power dynamics and power plays that go on with these negotiations. And things like the implementation of tariffs kind of without warning is also a power play. And it has some political implications, the idea of an us versus them, and that somehow we're being treated and rewriting the rules so that we will get what is fair. This makes them incredibly popular in the short term, till the effects of those kinds of things actually disadvantage the people that thought that they were going to get an advantage. And quickly, those people who thought that they were on the us team are now on the them team. When you realize you're in a precarious predicament, you have two choices. One, to double down on your faith that things are going to work out for your favor in the long term, or you fight against the regime that is disabling your autonomy. Joseph did a similar thing. When he got to far west in 1838 after fleeing Ohio, he determined that he wouldn't be pushed around any longer, that people needed to come into line, and the Danites were formed to ensure that the prophet and his counselors would be supported whether they were wrong or right. This initially seemed like a great idea because now the church and Joseph would fight for the members against the Missourians and things would be great for the saints. But this new arrangement upset the tenuous balance that was already in northern Missouri and caused a lot of conflict with the local citizens. The new regime needed to effect an economic base, and they did so by taxing the members with a form of tithing. The Danites were sent to make sure that the members would adhere to this commandment. The church also sent about gaining from the nearby citizens of Missouri through incursions and raids. And any of the members who didn't agree with this aggressive economic strategy were deemed to be in defiance or rebels and said to be set at the front lines of some of these raids so that they would be the ones that would come under conflict first if there was any pushback. What at first looked to be decisiveness and great leadership on the part of the First Presidency now became something that was going to disadvantage some of these saints and actually make them on the outer and probably in the them camp. The president of the Quorum of the 12, Thomas B. Marsh, and other apostle Orson Hyde fled to Richmond, Missouri to swear out an affidavit to the state that Mormons were an enemy, that they were looking to incur conflict and take from the local Missourians. The saints under Joseph Smith became more emboldened, and this resulted in the Mormon-Missouri War. And that's what we're currently seeing in the US. As tariffs are not working and this balance of payments economically is not happening in great ways, the Trump administration is looking at opportunities to take from nearby. This is incurring incursions into the Caribbean, with the idea that Venezuela is some kind of great enemy and confiscation of goods, with also the idea that it might need to be a raid. Venezuela has resources that would be beneficial to the United States, and in the current economic fall, they need to prop up the economy. Venezuela is becoming the ultimate them, which might justify going to war. And those at home who suggest that this is crazy and terrible might be sanctioned. One of the really interesting changes for the Trump administration and for the Republican Party is about who they're appealing to for their base. In his first term, Trump appealed to a lot of conservative immigrants who had come to America to make their home. They're hardworking, working class people who just want a fair deal. These immigrants often came from countries with political instability, and finding refuge in the United States made them incredibly grateful, and they worked really hard for their citizenship in this new America. There were also a lot of skilled migrants that came from countries that exported such great resources like science, technology, medicine, and these are important people to the American workforce, and also the idea of America being superior across the Western world. But this sentiment has changed. The idea that the people that are worthy to come to America are those from generally fair-skinned populations, white South Africans, Europeans, those who could make America white again. Those immigrants who come from Latin America, or those who might come from refugee or political unstable spaces, those are deemed to be dangerous because they might turn around and hurt their fellow Americans. Instead of hardworking Americans, they are deemed to be a threat. Even while going through the legal process, they are detained and deported. Other more worthy candidates are being offered asylum. This happened in the early church. One of the things that the Book of Mormon talked about was that the native inhabitants, if the Gentiles were not righteous, would rise up to form an army against them and scourge them or to wipe them out. Joseph sent missionaries to Indian Territory to align themselves with the Native Americans and to bring them into the fold of the gospel in a bid that they might be the mechanism by which the Latter-day Saints would be triumphant. But pretty quickly into the early church, these people were not very useful to the leadership of the church. They didn't join in great numbers, and even Missouri citizens suggested that the Mormons were acting in some kind of nefarious way by trying to recruit them. Missionary work quickly became focused on abroad, and missionaries were sent to the British Isles to convert those in the Industrial Revolution. People joined the church en masse and emigrated to the United States and into Nauvoo. These were white English-speaking people who swelled the ranks on the banks of the Mississippi. The Native Americans were having problems with the United States, and they came to Joseph to ask for his advice about what they should do and how they should react to what was going on for them. Joseph Smith told them that there was nothing he could do for them. The idea that Indians would join the church en masse and help the church to defeat the Gentiles was a major part of the early church, including the Book of Mormon. But in Nauvoo, Joseph was now comfortable, and his immigration of white European English speakers was a much more attractive proposition. They brought manpower and income that was important to the city, not what the refugee Native Americans had to offer. And that seems to be the case underpinning the type of immigration that the US is focusing on currently. The idea that citizenship can be for those who are incredibly wealthy and willing to invest, not those who are being displaced by political instability. One of the differences between President Trump and Joseph Smith but which they have a similar outcome, is the understanding about the separation of church and state. Trump is a political leader that wishes to have religion firmly in politics. And Joseph is a religious leader that wants to have politics in religion. President Trump wishes to conflate his political appointment with that of a religious leader. He courts as a base the religious right, and particularly Christian nationalism, and seeks to suggest that he is the epitome of their proponent and that he will create a Christian state in the United States government. Joseph is a religious leader who understands pretty quickly that he needs to be savvy when it comes to politics. Those who follow him want to know also the kind of political direction they should be engaging with. Joseph therefore became important to political leaders who wished to gain his favor and the vote of the Mormon people. And by Nauvoo, Joseph recognizes that it's in his advantage to be a civic leader along with being a religious leader. This attracts some criticism. This is a quote by Governor Duncan in 1842. This disgraceful attempt to form in a Republican government an established religion by legal enactment created through the audience a great sensation and opened their eyes to the rapid strides that were being made in their very midst towards an arbitrary and monarchical form of government. By 1844, this had got worse. The Quincy Whig reported, "It is the anti-republican nature of the organization over which he has almost supreme control, in which he is trained and disciplined to act in accordance with his selfish will. The spectacle presented in Smith's case of a civil, ecclesiastical, and military leader united in one and the same person, with power over life and liberty, can never find favor in the minds of sound and thinking Republicans." The Council of 50 also confirmed this. "The greatest fears manifested by our enemies is the union of church and state. I believe we are actually doing this, and this is what the Lord designs. The kingdom of God was established for the uniting of Ephraim. The scriptures say that Ephraim shall have the first dominion. There has been in every age of the world an effort made to establish a theocracy, but it has often been defeated." Joseph's efforts to establish a theocracy in Nauvoo by combining church and state was a really big deal and caused a lot of conflict leading to his death. President Trump's desire to unite the White House with religious authority is a really big concern that is tapping into some of the biggest fears of the base of American civil society, and if successful, could spell the end of democracy in the United States. An area that both Donald Trump and Joseph Smith have in common is the idea that they are successful, especially in business. And this is a big deal for most people, because if you're going to follow someone, you hope that they will be able to help you to have better economic success than maybe you would without them. Trump has certainly built some businesses, and he has a number of buildings with his name on them, which seem very flashy. But when you look at some of the businesses that he has been involved in, he's had a string of failures. And there also have been several bankruptcies. He's also refused to share his tax returns so you can tell what he's actually earning and what he's really worth, which seems to indicate that he may not be as business savvy as he might portray to other people. Joseph Smith absolutely did not have a business mind. He engaged in a number of speculative endeavors that failed miserably. In the early 1830s, he established a printing press and a mercantile business, both of which were supposed to give great money to him personally and also to the wider church. But he did not envision the Jackson County Saints being evicted and their printing press and their mercantile store destroyed. He set up a banking business in 1837 that he said that God had approved of and was going to last forever, and that fell over incredibly quickly. In Nauvoo, he bought a steamboat from the government on loan, and when that ran aground and damaged, he was out completely. He even tried to sue for bankruptcy, trying to get out of these large debts. And the whole of Nauvoo was basically on credit too, because he had been loaned this place and given interest payments which he just couldn't manage, because Nauvoo as a piece of land was not very commercially viable for any business activity. He did manage to build temples. He built one in Kirtland that got repossessed because of these great debts in Ohio. And he was building a temple in Nauvoo that was not yet completed when he was killed. And the problem with these buildings is they weren't really commercially viable either. They just were a gathering place. It was a build it and see if they would come kind of scenario. Joseph envisioned that these grand buildings would bring wealthy, famous, powerful people into the cities who would then be able to invest and give of their money. But all it really did was provide a hub for, converts of the church, most of them poor, to gather. Joseph made money off the speculation of land during these gatherings, but of course, when things went badly and they were kicked out, everybody lost everything. Joseph's poor money management and inability to see the future in any way that would save people or provide for them in some kind of incredible way just eluded the saints and Joseph's own ego. And this seems to be increasingly the case with Trump. The kinds of economic benefits he has promised, suggesting that he knows better, are just not coming to pass. In fact, things are getting worse economically quickly. And the only people getting enriched personally are the ones closest to him, including himself. This overconfidence and poor delivery seems to mark these authoritarian leaders and their get-out-of-jail-free card when they blame their detractors and those who haven't really seen the vision and followed through for lack of results. In this way, they can deflect blame and move on to the next scheme. Let's look at 3 key interactions and the insight that they may give us into authoritarian leadership and the way that they're framing what is going on for them. Charlie Kirk was assassinated in September of this year, and much has been made of the relationship that Trump had with him, but also the idea that he was incredibly supportive of Trump and that his death was a martyrdom, that the right could look at him as a hero that had died for the cause. There was a similar person in early Mormonism. His name was David Patton, and he was an apostle, and he died at the front of the militia during the Battle of Crooked River in 1838. He was a Danite and defender of Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith could do no wrong in his eyes, and he was held out to be a martyr because of his great sacrifice of his life during this Mormon-Missouri War. Joseph honored him with a place in Scripture in Doctrine and Covenants 124, where he was deemed to be in heaven because of his great sacrifice to the cause, to Mormonism as a martyr. Contrast that with Governor Boggs, who was an enemy to Joseph Smith and whom Joseph preached against many times. When a gunman shot Governor Boggs in 1842, and the report got back to Nauvoo that he was dead, which was incorrect because he was only wounded, people celebrated, including Joseph Smith, who had this vendetta against Governor Boggs and suggested that Governor Boggs had many enemies and so therefore they killed him. His presumed death was the result of him fighting against the saints and Joseph Smith personally. There's a similar contrast with Donald J. Trump in regard to Rob Reiner, who was found dead in his home. Trump suggested in a tweet that Rob Reiner had suffered at the hands of someone who was outraged because of the way that he treated Trump and the Trump administration. That Reiner had got the fruits of his terrible attitude against the president. This man certainly was not a martyr. He got what he deserved. And then there is this relationship between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin, who seems to be incredibly close to him. Trump talks about him in glowing ways, makes opportunities to go see him, and seems to admire him greatly over the way that he enacts his leadership style. The two seem to share a common authoritarian style, and Trump seems to take a lot of lead from Putin about how to govern. And despite this relationship being problematic to the American public, Trump still engages in it quite forcefully. He makes allowances for Putin. He seems to go out of his way to make Putin happy. And he does things that are counter to the American public because of his desire to have favor with Putin. All things that should raise alarm bells, but for some reason, Trump suggests that this relationship is important and this model of leadership is key. Joseph Smith also admired an authoritarian leader, particularly one who had conquered a continent through military means, and that was Muhammad. Joseph spoke about being a modern-day Muhammad to the Americas and being able to unite them through military means under a caliphate or a theocracy. And people around Joseph were dismayed by this terrible similarity, and they made mention of it many times. The idea that Mormonism would be the Islam of America was frightening to the general public. And the idea that the American president might be taking his lead from Russia is also frightening to America now.